Streaming. I think my YouTube had a stroke there for a second, but it would appear that we are live, so I'm going to pull a link and send it to Greg. I should move my phone because that's going to cause vibrations. And who is spamming me? No, shoot.
Good vibration.
Yeah. Send. I'll wait for Greg to see that on Facebook, and then I'll get underway here. Welcome all. What's up, Woltz? Mark, don't mind the name. All good. Good to see you. I think Greg already pulled the link because he's in the chat, so I think he already got it, and I'm just slow. Also wanna... That's not it. I'm just gonna drag this here. That'll be for shortly after we get underway. Just gonna make sure everything's going smoothly. Let me know in chat. Good evening. Where's the rest of the crew? Greg is taking the night, and Kyle is out due to some personal stuff. So it's just the two of us this evening.
How's everybody doing tonight? Hope everybody's doing well.
Hope everyone's enjoying the weather lately. Around here, it's been much better. Got up into the 50s yesterday.
Down here it's been in the 70s.
Thank you for flexing. But anyway, I figure we can get underway here. Welcome back to another United Weather Network podcast on the potential for severe weather tomorrow over the ArkLaTex, in addition to the update on seismic activity, as well as the having a stroke, as well as the This Day in History segment, where we'll go over the Buffalo Creek disaster, which happened in Virginia this day in 1976, and Josh will also go through some of the stuff with the decals and the GoFundMe, because he knows that better than I do. So welcome back. Hope you all are having a good day. Hope you all are enjoying the weather conditions as we have a bit more of a stable pattern lately. We are going to briefly discuss the potential for severe weather tomorrow. Is currently a marginal risk as issued by the Storm Prediction Center, mainly for hail. There is no threat present for tornadoes and wind, but the hail threat exists all the way down through near the Dallas area up to the border of Missouri and Arkansas. So the threat really there is for the stronger updrafts that could be capable of producing hailstones greater than 1 inch, as well as the potential for some gusty winds that may be non-severe as well. I'm going to briefly look through that. I figure we'll look through that first, actually, and then we'll go into what we could be expecting long term. So I'll click regionally here. get into a bit of an explanation for this. Make sure I have the correct model run as well. So tomorrow, the threat is present for marginal hail over the ArkLaTex. You can see along a warm front that's going to be sitting along Louisiana and through Texas. It's going to push north throughout the day from the coast. As that pushes through, you're going to see some isolated showers developing earlier in the day. As you go along, the threat will exist for some potentially marginal hail with the stronger updrafts that are present on the reflectivity scans here. If we go over to composite reflectivity, that's not composite. If we go over to composite reflectivity, which really shows the DBZs, which would be the heaviness and the a higher DBZ means you're going to have heavier rainfall, heavier precipitation of whatever kind. And if we go over here, you can see as the time goes along, you start to see some stronger storms develop through Arkansas, as well as the potential for the stronger updrafts to have marginal hail, like I said, gusty winds, some of which may be severe, some of which may not be. But as you can see later on through the night tomorrow, it just starts to form out into a line, and it pushes off towards the north and east, where there could be a bit of a rain threat for the Ohio Valley as well as the Mid-Atlantic and potentially even the Northeast, depending on how far the low pushes north. What's really going to drive this is the cool air aloft as well as the shear present. So we'll take a look at the lapse rates that are going to be helping these storms tomorrow. You can see as the day goes along, lapse rates start to advect further north, and even though they do fizz a little bit, you can still see lapse rates approaching 8 in areas like eastern Texas, Arkansas, Louisiana, and Oklahoma, which is where this threat is present. We're talking about a threat area. My apologies, not Louisiana, but we're talking about a threat area from Texas to the border of Missouri. So in those areas, you're seeing lapse rates upwards of 7, which is much better than what you would really need, we would say, for hail. What you're looking for hail is lapse rates of 6 to 6.5 degrees Celsius. Now, lapse rates are the change in temperature from wherever point you're trying to adjust here. So this is 700 to 500 millibars. You can see the change in temperature is 7 to 8 degrees Celsius. And negative 7 to 8 degrees Celsius as the temperature is going down the higher you get up. So the lapse rates really are going to drive the hail threat here. As that pushes off, you can see the hail threat starts to diminish. By this time, the storms are well off towards the north and east. They're well on their way to Kentucky, and at that point, they're likely windy rain as well. If we take a look at surface-based CAPE, convective available potential energy, you can see around as my pivotal weather loads, you can see that warm front pushing north during the day through Texas and up into the Tennessee Valley. That'll push north slowly but surely throughout the day. You can see some CAPE start to advect from it. Storms really aren't going to be firing where there is CAPE, which always seems to happen lately. But the CAPE is really not going to be the factor that drives this. The lapse rates and the cool air aloft, as well as the shear that will be present, we'll take a look at that, as well as the shear that will be present, are really going to drive the storms, drive the updrafts tomorrow throughout the day. If we take a look at the 500 millibar shear, which is what we basically consider the mid-levels in meteorology, how quickly the particle cools, lapse rates, and yeah. Take a look at the shear. You can see pretty strong over the areas that's outlined by the marginal risk throughout the evening tomorrow. So you can see 65 to 70 knots of 500 millibar shear. That is relatively strong. That would be what we were looking for in terms of getting some kind of organized thunderstorm development. We take a look at the 850, which is closer to the surface. 850 is really used to gauge what could be going on just slightly above the surface, even though it is much further above the surface. Really use it to gauge thunderstorm development, really gauge where thunderstorms could fire off. So you see with this, the line of storms actually follows the stronger shear here. So you can see the shear values getting up into 50 knots of 850, which is relatively strong for this time of year. And as it pushes off further north and east, you can see the 50 knots expands to a pretty big degree. So that's by the time that storms are starting to fizz out. That's by the time that storms are starting to fizz out and starting to get a little bit weaker. So the thunderstorms will still be present. However, the shear will likely make them a windier threat windier threat more so than hail, because at that time storms are starting to die off, starting to diminish, because this is 2Z, which would be 9 Eastern Time, 8 Central Time. By that time, you're losing daylight, which means you're losing the capability to have thunderstorms pop. So the threat tomorrow is outlined by hail and potentially some gusty winds with the stronger updrafts that you get at the surface. And in fact, I'm just going to go up here just so I can get that out of the way because it's easier. Definitely enough shear support hail. Yes, Morgan could call on that. Yep. You're talking with the hail. You don't want to be outside in any kind of hail event because hailstones can range in size and quantity. So hailstones have gone up to softball size, grapefruit size. However, that's not going to happen with this. You're really going to be seeing a lot of hail of the smaller kind in this case. So it may start to look like a layer of snow after all is said and done. That'll melt off relatively quickly with the warm front moving away. If we take a look at what we could be expecting long term, you see the thunderstorm development tomorrow that's showing up on the GFS. That eventually pushes off towards the north and east, gets a little bit of a rain threat, and then potentially a thunderstorm threat for Sunday as well. That doesn't seem to be too severe at the moment. It's mainly just warm front induced. It's going to be cooler temperatures, but definitely still the potential for thunderstorms in those areas outlined by the higher preset values. As you push along, you can see the front extends southward from this low pressure sitting over eastern Canada. So the front pushes out and extends south. That'll bring in some rain and some wind to these areas that are going to be impacted by the front. Particularly the areas closer towards the low pressure are going to get the stronger impacts in terms of the wind. But you can see areas like areas in the mid-Atlantic and even in the northeast, areas that are not accustomed to seeing rain and more so accustomed to seeing snow at this time of year are going to start to see a little bit of rain. Areas like the White Mountains, which I travel up to on a frequent basis, you're going to start to see some rain. Early March, we're not accustomed to seeing that. We're more accustomed to seeing snow up there. As time pushes along, you see that front moves out. High pressure starts to take into place once again over the Midwest. My apologies. So that'll push out and really allow the cooler temperatures to take place for these areas. So this is at the middle of the night. You can see temperatures getting below zero in areas of northern Wisconsin, but really across the board through into Kentucky and then up into the northeast. You're talking temperatures below freezing. You're going to be talking about pretty much the norm in this time of year. Excuse me. So areas like the New York State metro area are going to see temperatures hovering in the mid 20s. O'Hare is going to see temperatures hovering in the low 20s. Pretty similar across the board, except for areas of northern Wisconsin and Minnesota, where you're going to see temperatures get towards the single digits, a little bit cooler there. Relatively speaking, though, we're going to be going into a relatively calmer pattern for the next week or two. After that, we'll start to really transition to the spring pattern, which could come to fruition as a big severe weather season like we saw last year with spring. Could potentially be a lot of stuff to watch in Dixie Alley. But after that high pressure takes in, that'll move out by the end of your week next week. After that, a low pressure starts to take place, and there is a decent threat in three of the elements with this, so we're gonna have to bear that in mind, and I'll discuss that briefly here. So as the low pressure develops after it pushes off the Rockies to the east, you can see rain and storms start to develop in these areas in a relatively organized fashion, tangenting off of the cold front. As that pushes off in a relatively slow fashion towards the east, you can see after a few days you can see a little bit of clearing start to open up in areas of central and southern Alabama. If we take a sounding from out in front of that, we can see right in here the threat might be there might be a potential for some severe weather with that cold front extending south. So what we're looking at here is a relatively circular hodograph, as well as temperatures, surface and dews, that are rising into the mid to upper 60s. Now again, low Cape. This is March. We don't expect a lot of Cape in these areas, worded that incorrectly. Even though it's the areas that we're outlining for the severe weather season, we're still not going to see a lot of Cape as it's earlier. But the potential may exist along this area and along this corridor, pushing potentially into the border and areas of western Georgia. I'm having a difficult time tonight. As that pushes through, you might have the potential for some pop-up cells that may be capable of producing tornadoes and damaging wind. I'm not really seeing a lot of a hail threat with this, as this is an MCS. MCSs aren't known for their hail, but you may get a spinning cell or two that comes out in front of the cold front and potentially may have a tornado threat with that. As that pushes off, you can see the severe weather threat diminishes, but another threat unfolds, and that would be the flooding threat. So you can see the MCS and the rain sits over these areas for about a day or two, and the heavier rains in combination with the wind may cause some hazardous travel conditions, number one. Number two, may cause some river flooding out and around these areas, and potentially the threat for some rivers to overflow their banks. So if you happen to live in a coastal area that would be along a river up in South and North Carolina, you might want to monitor the situation going into next week. Could be the threat for some river flooding with these storms and the system that eventually and slowly moves its way out. As this pushes off towards the north and east, you can see very, very slowly, but the entire coast seems to get some rain going up and along. That'll be the beginning of your week next week. 2 weeks. It is Friday the 26th. I'm getting ahead of myself. Monday the 8th, which is 2 weeks from now, you could start to see a bit of a flooding threat take place over the majority of the East Coast. As that low starts to move up, it'll start to get slower and slower and slower till it eventually stops over the Carolinas, which is going to be the big threat for flooding. And as that pushes off, you can see relatively calm conditions prevail across most of the states at that point. However, another low pressure starts to take shape with some cold rain on the front of it and snow on the back end, which is very northern plains of that. As that pushes off, you could see some rain potentially for the Ohio Valley and potentially getting towards the New York City metro area. But after that, may get a little bit of snow from that as well, but after that, a relatively calmer pattern will ensue. You can start to see the low pressures are going to develop frequently from the pressure and energy starting to move down and shifting down the Rockies. So that's really going to be our transition to our new pattern here. We're going to have systems pushing out with extending cold fronts down through Dixie, which is what caused all the events over last year, particularly, most notably, Easter, stuff like that. As those lows push off, you're going to see the potential for severe weather start to increase in Dixie Alley. As the lows start to push off and as they start to gain more and more Gulf moisture, as time goes along and as we get closer and closer to April, when temperatures start to heat up more, as it gets more moisture and more instability, we could start to see the higher threat for severe weather in the same areas that got slammed with this stuff at the same time last year. That's really all we have to talk about. And looking through that, you can see the moisture starts to advect a little bit, and you start to see tad bit of disorganized storm development out in front in the Carolinas and into the northern areas of Dixie Alley, and you can see even a marginal severe sounding, decent helicity, and temperatures in the 60s, which is not surprising for March. So, could turn into a dangerous year. Well, that's if the analogs play out, which could be possible. It might end up being a bit shorter than last year, which sucks to say for storm chasers. But newest analogs don't want this to be as bad, which is, by all means, great news for people in the South. But what we could be looking at is a more intense, smaller patch. So lows are just going to persistently shift off the Rockies, shift east, and they'll be picked up by moisture and instability. And then you're going to have that threat shape over Dixie Alley. So if you have any questions, do not hesitate to put them in the chat. Monitoring that to my left here as we go through this stuff.
I was going to touch on that marginal threat tomorrow. Yeah. Everything, like you said, is going to ride that boundary, that warm front that's lifting northward. Like you said, it's mainly going to be a hail threat, gusty wind threat. And also, I wanted to touch on the The rain threat for the southeast, northern Mississippi, Alabama, for the next 3 days. There have been, well, Johnny Parker, that's in our weather group, he's picked up over 2 inches of rain since yesterday evening, and they're expecting or predicting another 4 inches of rain over the next 2 days over northern Mississippi, Alabama. So that could be an issue of flooding for northern Mississippi, Alabama,
Yeah, that
and
could definitely be an arising threat for those areas that have already been saturated pretty well this winter.
oh yeah, and that MCV MCS you was talking about, that's going to be an interesting setup to watch going forward in the next 2 weeks. Uh, in the south, we have a lot of low shear or high shear locate setups like that, so that will definitely be something to watch. It
Hmm.
all depends on how much sunlight you get, and how much heating of the day, and everything like that. So
Hmm. Um, but with everything being said, we're gonna transition into our next segment. Josh's mic is very low. Yeah, Josh, you're a little bit distant, so maybe just shift a little bit closer to your mic if you could. I
is
tried
that
turning
better?
up. Yeah, that does sound better on my end. I tried turning up the audio on my computer, so hopefully that works out well as well. But we're going to transition back to what we touched on last week with the seismic unrest that was present over the southwest Pacific that may eventually shift to the northeastern Pacific and northwestern United States. So we're going to just give a brief update on that. We're really trying to limit this to about 30 minutes so we don't keep you all waiting. So, the activity we talked about last week the activity we talked about last week has dimmed down a little bit. So you can see in the same areas that were getting the sixes and fives extremely persistently, they're now starting to see fours and low end fives for the most part. What this could mean, I have to cough. This could mean is two different things. A, could be expecting a big earthquake in that area as energy is starting to really mount a little bit more. And B, the transition of energy is really starting to occur. And on that note, what I will do is I'll shift over towards Indonesia, and you can see the amount of unrest that has been present in the form of fours and fives. In these areas, through Papua New Guinea, Indonesia, south of Japan, you can see lots of fives as indicated there. 5.2, 5.2, 4.9 there, etc., etc. The point has been made. Lot of unrest that is still present over these areas in the form of shallower earthquakes that are really, really extensive. Rather, not extensive, but continuous, I think is the word. There's a lot of them, and they haven't stopped as of late. The energy is starting to shift towards the north and the east, as you can see there, and I'll get into that. So you can see in terms of Japan, fours, low end fives, and as you get towards Alaska, threes and low end fours. This is more activity than we've been seeing in the past 2 weeks for these areas. So that is really showing that the change in energy is starting to take place. That is showing that the potential for stronger earthquakes could be mounting for the next couple of weeks, potentially even the next month over these areas. And the threat is still definitely present for a stronger earthquake of these in and around these areas of 5 or 6. We had a 5.1, and I'll see if I still have that here. We had a 5.1 off the coast of Oregon the other day, and I'm not seeing the 5.1, but I am seeing the 4.9. We had a 5.1 that was off the coast of Oregon the other day, followed by 4.9, and followed by several other tremors of 4s and high-end 3s. So energy is definitely there. It's not all coming to the surface yet, and we're going to have to wait on that, but there is still definitely the threat present in the future for stronger earthquakes going up and down the San Andreas fault line, up through Alaska, potentially even as far down as Mexico as well. So we're seeing in Mexico as well 5.2, 4.7, 4.7, etc. So the energy is all starting to make a shift. Further updates will be made on this accordingly. If something big happens, if a stronger earthquake happens, you'll see it on our Facebook page in terms of updates, what you can do in case evacuations may be necessary for something or other. I won't bring up what reasons could, well, I should bring up what reasons could be present, but this is me watching too many emergency alert system scenarios. But if a stronger earthquake does hit, there may be the potential for some sort of minor tsunami. I don't anticipate a big tsunami coming out of this, especially for the California coastline, as well as the potential for any kind of volcanic unrest for particularly Rainier. Mount Rainier has seen a bunch of tremors as of the last 30 days, so again, this is all perspective, really nothing that's too much of a threat at the moment, but going forward in the future, if we do start to see a big earthquake, we'll have to monitor those things very closely for further activity, in case any evacuations might be necessary. Briefly, on this day in history, 1972, February 26, 1972, the Buffalo Creek flood disaster that occurred in West Virginia due to a coal mine dam failure. So this occurred on this day, 1972, left 125 people dead, over 1,000 injured, and over 4,000 homeless. So I'll just read this out here on a tad bit that I found from Wikipedia and some other sites. The Buffalo Creek flood was a disaster that occurred on February 26, 1972, when the Pittston Coal Company's Coal Slurry Impoundment Dam number 3, located on a hillside in Logan County, West Virginia, burst 4 days after having been declared satisfactory by a federal mine inspector, which is quite ironic, if you do ask me. The resulting flood unleashed approximately 132 million U.S. gallons, which is 500,000 cubic meters, 500 million liters, of black wastewater cresting over 30 feet high upon residents of 16 coal towns along Buffalo Creek Hollow. Of a population of 5,125 were killed, 1,121 were injured, and over 4,000 homeless. 507 houses were destroyed in addition to 44 mobile homes and 30 businesses. The disaster destroyed or damaged homes in Saunders, Parody, Laredo, Conecuh, Lundale, Stow, Kreitz, Latrobe, Robinette, Amherstdale, Becco, Fanco, Brayholme, Oakville, Crown, and Kitzler. In its legal filings, Pittston Coal referred to the accident as an act of God, unquote. Dam 3, constructed of coarse mining refuse dumped in the Middle Fork of Buffalo Creek starting in 1968, failed first following many rains. The water from Dam 3 then overwhelmed Dams 2 and 1. Dam 3 had been built on top of a coal slurry sediment that had collected behind Dams 1 and 2 instead of a solid bedrock. Dam 3 was approximately 260 feet above the town of Saunders when it failed. So, with that being said, the failure of the dam was led by the heavy rain preceding it. And I'll go back to what we mentioned earlier in the podcast with heavy rain, particularly in South Carolina and North Carolina, areas where that MCS that I mentioned is going to be persistent. You might need to watch out for some sort of significant river flooding that could lead to some dam issues. And we have seen that, particularly in Virginia. I saw a dam nearly fail this year because of heavy rains that were just pretty persistent for about a day. It doesn't take that much, folks. So with this MCS, you're going to really have to watch the threat for flooding as well as gusty winds in that area. And you can see, with particularly on this day, February 26, 1972, Buffalo Creek flood killed 125, injured over 1,100, and left 4,000 homeless just because of heavy rain. So you can't take rain lightly. At this point, I'll hand it to Josh because he has info about our GoFundMe page as well as the United Weather Network decals that we have going on right now.
Yes, please go to our Facebook group and it's United Weather Network. If you would like to help us out, you can donate anything you would like. We're trying to get donations to help our chasers to fix their get the vehicles up and going and everything like that, so they can go on chases and bring you live footage of tornadoes throughout the spring and everything like that. I mean, just to bring y'all, you know, ground truth to everything that we see.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that
As much that we can get from the ground as possible. So we are selling the vehicle decals, which are basically bumper stickers. The GoFundMe is also up, I believe, and Josh, you know more about the GoFundMe
right.
than I do. So
I don't know how much it's up to, but the decals they're 4x4 decals. They're weatherproof. They're $5 a piece. Um, and the way we're trying to do it right now, you can donate to the GoFundMe, and you can contact the owner, Greg, or me through Messenger, and we will get that out to the decal out to y'all. And if y'all have not seen it, contact one of us, and we'll send y'all a picture of the decal. And well, I mean, we'll work with anybody that needs anything. I mean, just contact us.
just trying to. So if I pull this up here, Greg has set up a GoFundMe page for United Weather Network. It is in the announcements of the group. So future production PPE and tools working down on the ground to get ground coverage at the time of impact. So if you are interested in donating, can throw it in there. You'll get a decal for donating, if I recall correctly. And yeah, just we're trying to work overtime to build this up so that by storm season, hopefully we have something, what am I trying to say? Something reputable for you guys to look to for your source of severe weather information. And Josh, if you have nothing else to say.
I was about to say, we don't want to just do, tornadoes. We want to cover everything. Snow, I mean, everything. So.
Also would like to mention, and Greg, thank you for reminding me of this, we're going to discuss next week about solar cycles and how they might influence severe weather for the foreseeable future. So we were looking at that earlier, and we're about to go into a whole new solar cycle. So next week we will discuss the kind of impacts that might have in terms of severe weather, as well as the new pattern changes we might experience. Might start to see a readjustment in where we might see severe weather in the coming future because of the sun, because science.
Not to mention the shifting of the poles.
Oh yeah, that too. So we'll go into all of that next week, but I think for now, unless we have any questions, I'll just take a look at chat. But otherwise, with that being said, I'm going to end the stream here. Thank you all so much for tuning in to this United Weather Network podcast. If you guys did enjoy this, please be sure to leave a like rating down below. We do appreciate the support. Also, the subscribe button if you guys are new around here. Click the notification bell if you guys want to be notified every time we go live, post a new video, post a new briefing, etc., etc. But with that being said, my name is Morgan J. Fold. That is Josh, and we will see you on the next one.
Love you guys.